Hey guys, tonight we journey deep into the heart of ancient Egypt, not the postcard version with golden sand and triumphant pharaohs, but something quieter, stranger, more forgotten. You're not here to marvel at sparkling treasures under museum glass. You're here to tread softly through a land heavy with secrets, where history creaks under your sandals and every breeze feels like a whisper from the dead. Picture it now, the Valley of the Kings after sundown. Tourists are gone. The ticket booths are locked. And you slip past a rope barrier, flashlight low, air thick with the scent of warm stone and ancient dust. You probably won't survive this, honestly not, because of traps or curses, but because falling asleep here would mean not waking up until the morning sun sears you into a hieroglyph. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The tomb walls rise around you like silent bookends to a forgotten library. You trail your fingers along chipped limestone, past flaking blue paint and cartouches that once blazed in vivid gold. Somewhere above your head, millions of tons of desert wait patiently for gravity to win. But for now, you're safe. For now, the Valley of the Kings wasn't designed to be inviting. Pharaohs weren't buried here for beauty. They came for secrecy. Unlike the pyramids, these tombs are cut directly into the earth, hidden away like guilty thoughts. Ramses II, Tutankhamun. They all sleep here, or at least, what's left of them does. Historians still argue whether these tombs were primarily built for religious purposes, or if they were just elaborate keep-out signs for grave robbers. Either way, robbers came. Most of the chambers you tiptoe through tonight were looted centuries ago, often just years after burial. One ancient work crew even made a side gig out of robbing the very tombs they helped build. You have to respect the efficiency. The air is cool and musty as you duck under a low arch and descend further. It feels wrong, not haunted exactly, but loaded. Like the stone remembers every footstep, every whispered offering, every theft. And perhaps it does. Your flashlight flickers across a faded wall mural. Here, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming guides, a figure through the afterlife's bureaucratic maze. It's oddly relatable. Even in death, you've got paperwork. Another panel shows the weighing of the heart ceremony, where your heart must balance against the feather of Mat. Fail that test, and your soul gets eaten by a creature that's 1/3 crocodile, 1/3 lion, and 1/3 hippo. Basically, the worst animal smoothie imaginable. A breeze brushes your neck, impossible this far underground. Or is it just your imagination again? Still, you turn. Still, no one's there. One chamber up ahead contains a body. Or rather, a mistake. This isn't a pharaoh, but a high-ranking official, mistakenly entombed with royal rituals. No one noticed until years later, when his sarcophagus was opened, and someone muttered, "Wait, who's Steve?" That's not his real name, obviously, but you get the idea. Bureaucracy in ancient Egypt was messy, and not even the dead were safe from clerical errors. Quirkier still, some tombs here were repurposed. A chamber meant for royalty might be taken over by a lesser noble centuries later. Like crashing a luxury hotel suite you didn't pay for. A few even served as temporary storage for mummies during turbulent times. Imagine being the pharaoh and waking up next to your gardener. You stop to sit on a chunk of fallen masonry, its edge worn smooth by time and tourists. It's strangely comfortable. You look around. The silence here isn't empty, it's layered. It hums. A bat flits overhead, and you don't even flinch. You're too sleepy to care. It's funny how still everything feels. And yet these tombs were once buzzing with life, artists painting gods by oil lamp light, workers hauling stone with makeshift pulleys, priests chanting into the gloom. Even the graffiti here has history. In one tomb, an ancient scribe doodled, "I was here, and I didn't like the foreman." Some things never change. You rise again and move deeper. Your feet crunch lightly over centuries of wind-blown grit. Ahead, A narrow corridor slopes steeply down into darkness. It's said that one tomb in this valley runs over 400 feet underground. That's longer than a football field, and more winding than a bad dream. But tonight, you don't need to walk the whole thing. Just knowing it exists is enough. Above your head, the stars continue their slow glide over Egypt. The gods, those animal-headed beings you've seen 100 times on museum posters, are watching. Maybe. Or maybe they're just metaphors. Historians still argue whether Egyptian gods were seen as literal entities or symbolic archetypes, depending on the dynasty and region. Either way, you wouldn't mind having Bastet, the cat goddess, curl up next to you, right about now. You pass a sealed doorway, its lintel cracked. Behind it, possibly, is a room no one's entered in thousands of years. Or maybe it's just more rock. Egypt plays that trick a lot, offering mystery and giving you sand. The cool air begins to warm. Your breathing slows. Somewhere, faintly, a drumbeat echoes. Or is it your own pulse? This place is good at making you question things. That's why you're here, really. Not for treasure or answers, but for the feeling of being small inside something unimaginably old. And as you stand there, eyes adjusting to darkness that no longer feels threatening, you realize you've forgotten what time it is. Forgotten your name, even. For now, you're just another shadow in the Valley of the Kings, waiting quietly to be remembered. You shuffle back up the corridor, your footsteps echoing against limestone walls that have seen too much and said too little. The tomb behind you fades into the dark like the tail end of a dream. But you're not heading back to the land of the living just yet. Nope. You're detouring through the business of death, specifically. The awkward, the failed, and the deeply weird world of Egyptian mummification. Now, let's clear something up. Mummification wasn't a single, flawless ritual perfected by wisdom handed down from the gods. It was more like a recipe everyone kept tweaking and sometimes forgot halfway through. Embalmers worked in busy workshops, often located disturbingly close to cemeteries, and sometimes they got things hilariously wrong. One poor nobleman had his head accidentally separated from his body, then reattached facing the wrong way. Imagine spending eternity trying to look behind you. You're walking now through the shadow of a mummification tent. There's no real fabric left, of course, but your mind fills in the gaps. The flaps billow slightly in your imagination. Inside, a long, low table. Tools made of bronze, obsidian, and of course reeds, sharpened into fine hooks. The air smells of resin and natron, with a generous hint of decay. Probably not the best place for a dinner party. The process was gruesome and precise. Organs were removed, liver, lungs, intestines, and stomach then stored in canopic jars, under the watchful eye of 4 protective deities. The brain, not so lucky. A hook went up the nose and scrambled it into goo, before being poured out like a bad milkshake. And no, they didn't keep it. Ancient Egyptians didn't think the brain did much. The heart was the true seat of memory and personality, which, when you think about it, is actually kind of sweet. But not every embalmer was exactly top tier. Some, judging by the evidence, really phoned it in. One royal mummy was stuffed full of sawdust and linen, like a poorly made teddy bear. Another was coated in resin so thick that modern archaeologists had to use CT scans just to figure out what body parts were inside. Historians still argue whether these were the result of hurried preparations, experimentation, or just a really bad performance. Review. There's also evidence of occasional ancient malpractice. A papyrus from the 21st dynasty details an investigation into a group of embalmers who'd been caught stealing gold from corpses, and even, brace yourself, reusing tombs by evicting earlier residents. Sorry, Lady Marisank, we've got a new client. Pack up your wrappings. Yikes. You stoop beneath a ghostly acacia tree, its branches imagined more than seen, and picture a body laid out in the hot sun, drying, waiting to be wrapped. The linen itself was no afterthought. Rich Egyptians used yards upon yards of fine cloth, sometimes with prayers or spells written right onto the fabric. One mummy was wrapped in over 3,000 feet of linen. That's about half a mile. Somewhere in there was a person, probably very, very patient. And here's a little-known twist. Not all mummification was done for reverence. In some late periods, embalmers mummified pets for sale. Yep, the ancient world had souvenir mummies. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, sometimes wrapped with care, sometimes stuffed with straw, and occasionally just faked entirely. One mummified falcon turned out to be a bundle of twigs. Imagine paying good money for that. You approach what had once been an embalming basin, its stone worn smooth by time and the salty hands of dozens of workers. You can almost hear the chants, low and repetitive as priests paced slowly around a body, murmuring words from the Book of the Dead. Not a literal book, by the way, more like a flexible playlist of spells and instructions. When you reach the field of reeds, take a left. If you see a giant snake, do not panic. And what about the funerals themselves? Well, they were half solemn rite, half performance art. Professional mourners were hired to wail loudly, smear ash on their faces, and throw themselves to the ground. Picture it, dramatic sobbing, flowing black hair, and the occasional sideways glance to make sure the audience was watching. You've probably seen less committed performances on reality TV. And then there were the funerary feasts. Think of it as the after-party, but with more ghosts. Guests dined on meat, beer, and bread, while the deceased was symbolically fed offerings. Some tomb paintings even show servants holding up plates of food to statues. Whether the dead actually got any of it, debatable. But at least they were remembered. Some scholars believe these feasts could last for days. Others think they were more reserved affairs, depending on the family's wealth and the prominence of the departed. Historians still argue whether these post-burial banquets were truly joyful, or more performative grief displays. Either way, you wouldn't want to be stuck doing the dishes afterward. The strangest part of all, some mummies were actually reburied centuries after death. Think about that. Long after their original funerals, long after their names were forgotten, someone still thought they deserved better. So they dusted off the corpse, gave it a fresh look, and tucked it back into the earth, a kind of second chance at eternity. You sit now beside a forgotten pit, where pieces of linen flutter like old flags in your mind. The stars above twinkle through a ragged hole in the cliff face. A breeze slips down into the earth, soft and persistent, and for a moment, you wonder what it would feel like to be perfectly preserved. Skin leathery but intact, eyes missing, but somehow still watching. And yet, isn't that what history is trying to do? Wrap moments tightly in layers of memory, spell, and salt, hoping, perhaps foolishly, that someone like you will one day peel it all back and see what was hidden underneath. You yawn, stretch your fingers out on the cool stone beside you, and rest your head lightly on your shoulder. Not asleep yet, but almost. You wake yourself gently, if waking is even the right word for it. You never truly drifted off, just sank a little deeper into the rhythm of this place. The air still smells of dust and ancient oils, and your ears ring faintly with imagined chants. But now, it's time to take a different turn, not deeper into the tombs, but toward the temples, where something truly bizarre is waiting in the water. You walk along a dry stone path under the shadow of looming columns, each carved with gods who seem to smirk slightly as you pass. These aren't just decorative statues, they're watching you, not metaphorically. In some temples, the priests swore the gods could literally see, and sometimes speak, and tonight, the one doing the watching might just be a crocodile. You've arrived at the temple of Sobek, the crocodile god. Here, priests didn't just worship the ancient reptiles. They lived with them, bathed them, fed them, named them. Some even swore they could communicate with them in dreams. Historians still argue whether this was pure devotion or a clever psychological trick to make locals behave to all. If your priest's roommate is a hungry Nile crocodile, you're probably not skipping your temple dues. The temple pool now, dry and silent once, shimmered with sacred water. You imagine it full, glittering under torchlight, with two crocodiles floating like gods in their own private spa. One might have been named Petsuchos, the most famous of Sobek's scaly avatars. He wore golden earrings, was fed honey cakes and roast meat, and lived in luxury until he eventually died and was embalmed like royalty. That's right, priests mummified crocodiles. Hundreds of them, in fact. Some wrapped individually, others bundled like terrifying gift baskets. You kneel beside the ancient pool's edge. The bottom is lined with stone blocks, some etched with symbols of fertility, protection, or chaos, depending on which way the river flowed that year. You dip your fingers into nothing, but you feel coolness all the same. The memory of water lingers here. So does the tension. Here's the strange part. Sobek wasn't a simple god of destruction. Despite the whole giant teeth and death roll thing, he was also considered a healer, a creator, and a bringer of fertility. Crocodiles, in their own unpredictable way, were seen as sacred protectors of balance. That might explain why the priests raised them with such care, or maybe it was just an ancient version of the world's weirdest petting zoo. You walk further along the inner corridor, where worn reliefs tell fragments of daily rituals, priests anointing statues, smearing them with oils, dressing them in linen, even offering them little meals. It's easy to laugh at the idea of feeding statues or singing to reptiles, but then again, have you ever thrown a birthday party for your dog? Ancient rituals weren't so different, just louder, greasier, and more obsessed with eternity. Suddenly you step into a small, darkened chamber. This is where things get stranger. A long, shallow niche in the floor suggests a ceremonial birthing space, and on the wall above it, a crocodile-headed figure standing over a woman, arms raised, surrounded by lotus blossoms. Some scholars believe this shows Sobek as midwife or maybe something else. The image is debated. Some think it reflects myth, others think it was just a strange coincidence, misinterpreted over time. Historians still argue whether these images depict literal beliefs or symbolic political propaganda aimed at strengthening priestly power. But here's what's clear. The priests of Sobek believed deeply that their god could influence everything from childbirth to flooding seasons. So they tended his crocodiles carefully, brushing them with perfumed oils and chanting prayers into their scaly ears. Somewhere between horrifying and adorable. Really, one inscription, here barely visible, now lists the gifts made to a crocodile. Sanctuary, baskets of fruit, wine, linen cloths, even small statuettes. No word on whether the crocodiles appreciated the trinkets, but you imagine at least one of them enjoying the grapes. You move back toward the exit and pause beside a mummified crocodile on display in your mind. It's not just one beast, but many layered like an onion of reptiles, snouts poking from every edge of the wrapping. They weren't always real either. Some crocodile mummies are little more than bundles of mud, reeds, and a few bone fragments, wrapped to look sacred. Egypt had a black market for holy animals. Go figure. And what of the priests, living day and night beside apex predators, wearing linen robes soaked in temple incense, whispering prayers at dawn, while side-eyeing a crocodile that's definitely looking at you like lunch. It's easy to imagine devotion tipping into fear, but some of them genuinely believed, not in fear, but in awe. One surviving him praises Sobek as he who rises from the water, shining in glory, guardian of the people, nourisher of the fields. That's a lot of praise for a creature that can't blink. But then again, try staring into a crocodile's eyes under moonlight and not believing in something. You lean against a wall now, eyes heavy, breath slowing. Outside, the desert wind hums against cracked stone. The temple is empty. The pool is still dry. But in your mind, water laps softly. A crocodile watches. A priest chants something you can't quite translate. And for a brief, strange moment, you feel oddly safe, like some ancient god is still keeping vigil over your sleep. You step out from the temple's shadow, sand crunching underfoot, only to stumble into something that feels oddly familiar. A stall, not made of papyrus or stone, but wood, brightly painted, garishly decorated, and absolutely packed with junk, trinkets, amulets, papyrus scrolls with your name spelled in hieroglyphs. Welcome to ancient Egypt's most bizarre little corner, the curse economy. Yes, even thousands of years ago, fear sold. And nothing sold better than a good, old-fashioned curse. You walk slowly past imaginary vendors hawking charms said to ward off grave robbers, summon divine favor, or, more entertainingly, inflict terrible digestive problems on your enemies. It's like Etsy, but with more scarabs and fewer refunds. The belief in curses wasn't some niche superstition either. Egyptians lived and died by magic Heka, as they called it, considered just as real as gravity. Officially, temples and priests were the source of sanctioned helpful magic. But the real fun happened in the side alleys, the homes, the whispered exchanges between neighbors. You crouch beside a chipped steeler propped awkwardly against a wall. The inscription's simple. Whoever disturbs this tomb shall lose their eyes and sleep with scorpions. Subtle, huh? There's a grim poetry to these warnings. Some are carved with divine symbols meant to amplify the threat. Others are etched hurriedly, as though the builder was really hoping fear would do what locks and guards couldn't. Historians still argue whether most tomb curses were sincere warnings, or just theatrical deterrents like putting a beware of dog sign when you only own a mildly judgmental cat. But the results? Undeniable. People got spooked, and centuries later, so did archaeologists. You remember the famous curse of the pharaoh, whispered after the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Lord Carnarvon died shortly after the tomb was opened, and rumors swirled that the young king had reached out from the beyond. Never mind that Carnarvon had an infected mosquito bite and a poor immune system. Or that, statistically, everyone involved lived remarkably long lives. The story stuck, because it's spookier that way, and let's be honest, scarier things have gone viral for less. You keep walking, now passing ghostly merchants who wave you over. This amulet, one might say, will protect your unborn children from crocodile demons. Another waves a scarab the size of your palm. This one ensures safe passage to the afterlife. Money back if not satisfied. You imagine them, with wide grins and sandals made of braided reeds. Not all curses were carved into stone. Some were written on little scraps of papyrus and buried beneath doorways, slipped into beds, or tied to the feet of figurines. Some were love spells, others revenge incantations. One especially dramatic curse lists over 50 potential punishments, including blindness, infertility, madness, and being devoured by wild dogs. Ancient Egyptians did not mess around. Interestingly, many of these magic users were women, while high priest roles were mostly reserved for men. Ordinary magical practice, especially involving love, fertility, and household protection, was often a woman's domain. You picture one now, kneeling in her courtyard at dusk, whispering over a bowl of oil as she casts a spell to keep her family safe, to give her neighbor just a little rash. Balance. You approach the ruins of what might once have been a household shrine. A tiny clay figure remains, arm missing, eyes wide. It's not grand, but it doesn't have to be. Magic in ancient Egypt didn't require giant temples. It lived in homes, in kitchens, in small moments of desperation and hope. And sometimes, it made its way into royal politics. One papyrus tells of a plot where harem women attempted to curse the pharaoh, using wax figurines and spoken spells. Real cloak and dagger stuff. The plot failed, and the conspirators were executed. Still, you can't help but admire the audacity. Trying to overthrow a god king with a candle and some bad vibes. Bold move. You sit now beside a crumbled wall where a curse was once scratched, perhaps in panic. The letters are barely visible, a name, followed by a warning. It's not directed at you, but it still makes your skin prickle a little. Magic, for the Egyptians, was a language. And like any language, it could be twisted, used kindly or cruelly. A blessing and a curse could look identical on papyrus. It just depended on who was reading it. And of course, some people made a lot of money off this ambiguity. Certain priests became specialists in curse lifting. For the right price, they'd come to your home, wave some incense around, and declare your troubles officially removed. You wonder how many ancient Egyptians breathed sighs of relief while quietly checking under their beds, just in case. In another corner of the imaginary market, a little boy holds out a snake-shaped amulet. For protection, he says solemnly, from all things, especially your in-laws. You try not to laugh. He might be serious. Even pharaohs played the curse game. Some sealed their tombs with elaborate threats, invoking gods with terrifying punishments. One stone reads, "May the crocodile be against you in water, the serpent against you on land, the hippopotamus against you in the river." That's basically a full ecosystem of nope. You reach the edge of the market now, the sounds fading into the soft hush of sand and memory. There are no stalls, no merchants, just wind curling through half-buried stones and your own sleepy footsteps. But maybe, just maybe, something lingers. The echo of a whispered threat. The faint scent of myrrh. A feeling in your spine, like someone just wrote your name on a very old piece of parchment. You rub your eyes. The shadows are longer now, stretched like tired limbs across the path. If there's a curse on you, it hasn't kicked in yet. Or maybe it already has, and it just feels like sleep. Either way. You walk on. Your path meanders now along a corridor of statues, silent rows of pharaohs, gods, and divine hybrids, all carved in hard lines and perfect symmetry. But one thing catches your eye, a figure you recognize. Almost. The tall posture, the proud gaze, the long kilted something glued awkwardly to the chin. It's not part of his face. It's strapped on. A beard, and not just any beard, a fake one. You lean in close. This is the ceremonial false beard, worn by the elite, especially pharaohs, whether they were naturally bearded or not, which frankly, many were not. Egyptian nobility often went clean-shaven, waxing themselves head to toe, except for the part where they pretended to be fabulously bearded gods, a bit like showing up to court in a rented superhero costume. This wasn't just fashion. The beard was a statement, a symbol of divine authority and cosmic legitimacy. It said, "I'm not just ruling Egypt, I'm standing in for the gods while I do it." Pharaohs, male or female, were expected to embody Horus on earth, and Horus, of course, rocked a beard. Even Hatshepsut, Egypt's most famous female pharaoh, wore one. Sculptures of her show a long curved ceremonial beard, jutting proudly from her otherwise smooth face. Historians still argue whether this was a calculated political move, or simply a way to fit into a system that wouldn't let her rule without adopting masculine symbols. Either way, she wore it with confidence. You imagine now the royal dressing room, filled with servants, incense smoke curling upward, linen robes being arranged with mathematical precision. A gold-strapped false beard is lifted from a velvet box and gently secured to the ruler's chin. A light tug confirms it's on tight. There's no superglue involved. Just clever braiding and ritualistic flair. But it wasn't all smooth. There's a tale, possibly exaggerated, but deliciously awkward, of a pharaoh's beard falling off mid-ceremony, to the horrified gasps of everyone watching. Whether this was divine punishment or just an overly humid day, no one knows. But imagine the silence as a god-king hastily tries to reattach his chin. Not exactly eternal glory. You stroll through an imaginary palace now. Floors slick with polished alabaster, walls buzzing with the flickering light of oil lamps. Here, fashion and power were inseparable. Wigs were another essential. Elaborate. Ones heavy and perfumed, stacked high or styled with intricate curls. Both men and women wore them not out of vanity though. Let's be honest, some probably did. But as a signal of status, ceremony, and hygiene. Real hair was often shaved, to avoid lice. The wigs were cleaner, more fashionable, and absolutely fabulous. A noblewoman passes you, her wig braided with beads and gold thread. A cone of scented fat melting slowly atop her head like a sleepy candle. It's a perfumed conreal things, used to drip pleasant-smelling oils down during banquets. The ultimate multitasking accessory. Both statement piece and slow-release air freshener. And the eyeliner. Oh, they went all in. Thick lines of black, coal for both men and women. Not just for drama though. Clearly, drama was a bonus, but for health. The dark pigment helped reduce glare from the sun, and possibly offered antibacterial benefits. So next time someone says your makeup is too much, remind them you're just channeling 18th dynasty skincare. You glance down at your own fed imaginary. Of course, and picture yourself in sandals so finely crafted they'd shame modern loafers. But here's the thing. Many Egyptians walked barefoot most of the time. Sandals were ceremonial, or reserved for long walks across hot stone. Think of them as formal wear for the feet. But back to beards. Some priests also wore false beards, especially those serving Osiris, the god of the dead. His was always curved, upward, at the end a divine style Q. Pharaohs copied this shape for their posthumous statues. The living wore beards straight. The dead curled theirs like a final flourish. Even in eternity, fashion had rules. You find yourself now inside a grand hall. Columns painted in faded blue and red, hieroglyphs marching along every wall, like quiet prayers. At the center stands a towering statue of a seated pharaoh, beard and all. The statue's eyes look forward, proud but tired. You get the feeling he's been waiting for someone to ask why the beard mattered so much. It wasn't just decoration, it was myth. The beard connected the king to Osiris, the ruler of the underworld. To where it meant to claim more than earthly power, it meant you were prepared to govern the land of the living and the dead. It meant you were more than mortal, and that's what ancient Egypt did best. Turned performance into permanence. Whether it was wrapping a body in 300 feet of linen, or strapping on a beard to impersonate a god, it all pointed toward the same goal: immortality through style. You ease down beside one of the fallen statues. Its beard has chipped away. Only a stub remains, like the ghost of a crown. The stone is cool. The room is warm, and your eyelids are getting heavier. Outside, wind brushes against pillars and slips through carved openings in the ceiling. It doesn't howl, it hums, almost like it's whispering a bedtime story about a civilization that dressed itself in power, painted its eyelids like the gods, and believed that with the right wig and beard, you could walk between worlds. You adjust your imaginary headpiece, chuckle softly at the idea of falling asleep in a beard, and let yourself drift. By now, you've worn the false beard, powdered your ceremonial wig, and shuffled through temple markets dodging curses like spiritual potholes. So naturally, it's time for a little self-care. And what better way to relax than with a rejuvenating spa day, ancient Egyptian style. You stroll into a courtyard, sunlit and still, where imaginary stone basins glisten with the ghosts of scented oils and bathwater long gone. The smell in the air is rich honey, myrrh, crushed lotus, and that crocodile dung. Yep. Welcome to the glamorous world of ancient wellness, where beauty treatments involved ingredients that would get your modern-day skincare brand banned. Let's begin with the basics. Sunscreen. Not the kind you squeeze from a tube, but something more organic. According to surviving medical papyri, one popular sun protection paste was made from crushed plants, clay, and yes, crocodile dung. Supposedly cooling, possibly antibacterial, and definitely stinky. You smear a little on your imagined face and suddenly understand why no one stood too close to the priests during outdoor rituals. Next up, a refreshing drink to boost vitality. Your host hands you a cup of warm, gritty liquid. It contains crushed lizard, bitumen, and something that smells suspiciously like onions. Down the hatch, ancient Egyptian medicine wasn't about taste, it was about balance, both physical and spiritual. Many remedies were designed to rebalance the body's internal humors, often using ingredients that seem more like potion than prescription. Historians still argue whether these treatments were symbolic, partially effective, or just ancient quackery wrapped in linen. Some formulas actually worked. Honey used liberally on wounds has real antibacterial properties, and moldy bread, surprisingly, a protopenicillin. But others, well, there's just no kind way to say it. Some of these recipes were bonkers. You ease into a shallow bath, cut from limestone. The water is imaginary, of course, but your skin tingles with the memory of natron, the all-purpose salt mixture used for everything from cleaning wounds to drying out mummies. Here in the living world, it was also mixed into scrubs and hair treatments. Exfoliating, absolutely. Comfortable, not even slightly. A servant fans you gently, wearing a perfume cone on her head that melts slowly, sending waves of lotus and cinnamon into the air. These cones weren't just fashionable, they were practical. By mid-feast, they'd soaked your wig, your robe, and possibly the upholstery in fragrant oil. A bit like marinating yourself in aromatherapy. Ancient Egypt smelled intense. You pause. To admire your reflection in a polished copper mirror. Bronze wasn't just for weapons, after all. Egyptians prized a good mirror, especially for applying their signature eye makeup, which wasn't just for beauty. Thick lines of kohl acted like natural sunglasses, cutting glare and potentially warding off eye infections. Scientists today still debate whether the lead content had mild antiseptic effects. But either way, it looked fierce. Cosmetics were gender neutral. By the way, men wore eyeliner, blush, and perfume just as confidently as women. Beauty wasn't vanity, was divine. Looking your best honored the gods. It also helped in the afterlife. You didn't want to meet Osiris looking shabby. Now imagine stepping into the apothecary and herbalist's paradise. Dried herbs hang in bunches. Papyrus scrolls list treatments in looping script. One remedy suggests mashed dates mixed with pigeon droppings for a cough. Another prescribes crushed scarab beetle as a fertility aid. You open a jar, sniff, and immediately regret it. Must have been a strong batch. Not all remedies were ingested. Some were worn as charms. You pass a shelf, stacked with tiny amulets, hearts, ankhs, eyes, cats, frogs, each one linked to a different protection. Some even came with instructions, whisper this prayer. Avoid fish on odd days, don't look at the moon. You begin to suspect. Half of ancient medicine was just elaborate trial and error. You lie back on a smooth bench, imaginary attendants massaging your limbs with oils made from almonds and moringa. The pressure is firm but relaxing. You drift slightly. The room around you fades into flickering torchlight and the gentle murmur of temple music. A sistrum rattles. A priestess chants in a language only half understood now, and just when you think this day of luxury can't get more surreal, in walks the doctor. Or rather, the SWNW Egypt's word for physician. He carries a bag of tools that look suspiciously like a torture kit. Tweezers, scalpels, probes, and something sharp made from obsidian. You swallow nervously. It's just a consultation. Right. Egyptian doctors were specialists and trained in temples. Others, in medical schools, like the famed Purank, the House of Life. One might treat only eyes, another only stomachs, another exclusively focused on headaches caused by angry spirits in the skull. Accurate. Not always, but impressive. Absolutely. You open your imaginary medical chart. It includes your heartbeat, dreams, digestive cycles, and maybe a note from the gods. In this world, medicine and magic went hand in hand. No shame in casting. A spell and applying ointment. Belt and suspenders, ancient style. A fun fringe fact. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the earliest known surgical texts, includes real treatments for head injuries, including triage advice. If the patient speaks and breathes, great. If he doesn't, well, recite a prayer and move on. Brutal triage, but advanced for its time. And yes, dental care was primitive. You might chew on a date pit, or get a honeyclove poultice, but if a tooth got infected, extraction with brute force and hope. You clench your imaginary jaw, and thank the gods for modern anesthetics. You rise from the massage table, skin oiled, hair curled, smelling like a royal dessert. Your spa day is complete, but as you leave, you spot a small statue at the door, a household goddess named Toret. She's got the body of a hippo, the back of a crocodile, and the face of someone who will tell your fortune whether you asked or not. She protected pregnant women and scared away demons. Also a big fan of baths, apparently. You bow slightly and step back into the dusty twilight. Your imaginary feet soft on the warm stone. You're not just clean, you're ritually renewed, ready to face whatever strange thing comes next. Or, let's be honest, ready to nap like an embalmed cat in a sunbeam. You're floating now, in that half-dream state, only achieved by utter stillness and slightly oversalted skin. But your journey presses on this time, not through tombs or temples, but into the one place even the pharaohs feared, the courtroom of the gods. You shuffle down a long stone hall reel, or not. It feels endless, lined with torch niches and faded inscriptions. This is not a mortal court with judges in powdered wigs. This is the Hall of Mat, the place where your soul gets weighed like produce at a farmer's market. Spoiler alert. No one brings receipts. Your heartbeat slows. Instinctively as you approach a towering mural, depicting the weighing of the heart. Anubis, sleek and jackal-headed, adjusts the scales. On one side, a heart. Yours, presumably. On the other, a feather, light as truth. The stakes. Everything. If your heart is heavier stuffed with lies, spite, and maybe that time you borrowed your neighbor's donkey, then you're handed over to Amit, the devourer. She's part crocodile, part lion, part hippo, and entirely not in the mood for moral gray areas. Amit doesn't punish. She ends. No reincarnation, no afterlife, no second chances. Just spiritual deletion. You imagine standing there, sweat trickling down your back, as Thothia I-besetted god of wisdom scribbles notes with annoying precision. Maybe he raises an eyebrow when he gets to that thing you said last week. You know the one. And over in the corner, Osiris sits on his throne, dressed in mummy wrappings. Arms crossed like he's judging a talent show. This moment, the weighing, was the climax of every Egyptian life. Not just a myth, it was a certainty. They lived with it in mind. Tomb walls bore it. Coffin texts described it. Even papyri tucked inside mummy wrappings included cheat sheets, spells, confessions, backup plans, in case your heart got a little lumpy. One of the most famous is the negative confession, a list of statements the soul would make before the gods. I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied. There were 42 of them. You wonder how many you'd pass, and whether fibbing during the confession counted against you. Probably. Historians still argue whether these confessions were aspirational or required. Proof was the point, to show good intentions, or to demonstrate a life well lived by community. Standards hard to say. But the heart didn't lie. At least, that was the idea. You glance down at your imaginary chest. Your heart beats steadily, unweighed, but not unnoticed. The ancient Egyptians believed it was the seat of the soul, consciousness, memory, and personality all bundled together in that fist-sized thumper. It was the one organ left inside during mummification, unless it went missing. In which case they improvised with a heart-shaped amulet and hoped the gods didn't notice. You pass into another imagined chamber. This one's smaller, darker, more intimate. It might be your personal judgment room. You spot your own name scratched into a cartouche on the wall, spelled correctly, somehow. The room feels heavier, but also fair. This wasn't a hellfire and damnation scenario. The Egyptian afterlife wasn't binary. It was ordered, just. Mat, the goddess of balance and truth, embodied more than rules. She was the concept of universal harmony. People didn't fear divine wrath so much as divine imbalance. When you died, you weren't punished for sin. You were measured against order. You either aligned with it, or you didn't. You pause now, beside a flickering brazier. A ghost of incense curls upward. Frankincense or myrrh, maybe both. They were used during funerals to purify the soul and impress the gods with good taste. You inhale slowly. The scent is calming. You imagine Thoth glancing up, giving you a slight nod. Maybe you're doing okay after all. But judgment wasn't just about the dead. It influenced the living. Pharaohs were expected to rule in Matu, uphold justice, truth, balance. When times got bad, famine, flood, chaos, people didn't just blame nature. They suspected Mat had been disturbed, that the king had failed to maintain cosmic balance. In one especially revealing text, a high official writes that Pharaoh was the staff of Mat, implying that without him, the entire system would collapse into darkness. No pressure. You walk a little further, deeper into the metaphor. Past scenes of judges, scribes, animal-headed gods, quietly observing from niches carved in your mind. Here's one with the head of a ram, another with a crocodile snout, and wait, a baboon. Yes, both had a baboon form too, and it's staring right at you. Judging, probably remembering that time you didn't finish that history book you bought. And yet, something about this place is comforting. If your life was good, honest, fair, then death wasn't terrifying. It was a passage. The field of reeds waited on the other side, a paradise resembling the best parts of Egypt. Green fields, flowing water, plentiful food, and shade. All you had to do was make it past Amit without becoming a snack. You sit now in an imagined chair made of palm wood. The feather of mat floats in the air beside you, impossibly light. Your heart is quiet. Whether it would balance, you can't say, but the silence tells you something important. You've already made it this far. And somewhere, across the river of night, someone whispers your name kindly. You rise from the judgment hall, not with a start, but with that calm, post-report card kind of relief. You weren't devoured. Your soul still exists. Good job. Let's not tempt fate by asking for extra credit. Now your steps take you into another kind of mystery, still sacred, but far more earthly. You find yourself walking the edge of the Nile, somewhere in the misty dawn of memory, where the world begins and ends with the river. The Nile isn't just a landmark in ancient Egypt. Is Egypt, everything that lived, breathed, or bloomed here, depended on this great, serpentine ribbon of water. Crops, travel, taxes, myth, gossip, all of it flowed from the river's slow, deliberate pulse. But the Nile wasn't just a gift, it was a contract. And when it didn't flood the way it was supposed to, Egypt got cranky. Or hungry. Or both. You crouch beside the imaginary waterline, your hand hovering just above the mirrored surface. In your mind, it's high season. The flood-called Akhet has arrived, swelling the river beyond its usual banks. Not violently, like some angry sea, but steadily, predictably, until it didn't. The Egyptians watched the flood levels with obsessive precision. Nilometers, yes, actual ancient tools for measuring water. Height were carved into rocks, temple walls, and riverbanks. Too low, and famine loomed. Too high, and villages got soggy. Just right. And everyone cheered, paid their taxes, and probably threw a goat-shaped cake into the water in thanks, at Elephantine Island. Priests oversaw one of the oldest Nilometers. Picture them in linen robes, leaning over stone steps like ancient meteorologists, muttering numbers and arguing over cubits. If the water didn't reach the right level, time to beg the gods for mercy and maybe blame the local governor just a little. Historians still argue whether these measurements were more symbolic or truly scientific, but either way, the pressure was real. The entire agricultural economy turned on the Nile's seasonal mood swings. No spreadsheets, no weather apps, just hope, experience, and a sacred river with commitment issues. You stand now in an invisible field, green and golden, swaying gently. In the breeze, imagine rows of barley and emmer, weedy jeps, staple crops, stretching across the fertile black soil. Or Kemet, from which the very name Kemet Egypt was derived. This is what the Nile gave them. Not just water, but life itself. Farmers used a method called basin irrigation, directing floodwaters into contained plots where it could soak deep into the earth. No sprinklers, no hoses. Just patient engineering and a good relationship with your neighbor, so your canal didn't accidentally reroute half your water. You see the tools now. Simple wooden plows, often pulled by oxen. Flint sickles set into curved wooden handles. Baskets made of reeds, overflowing with grain. And there, in the corner, someone writing it all down. Because yes, even farming was supervised. Enter the scribes. You follow one now, his scroll, tucked under arm, reed pen behind ear. He's not here to farm, he's here to record. Scribes were everywhere in ancient Egypt, tracking harvests, measuring flood levels, tallying fish, counting jars of oil. You name it, they wrote it. In triplicate. Being a scribe was a ticket to the good life. Not flashy, but stable. Literate, in a world where most were not. They wore modest robes, recited poetic complaints about back pain, and quietly ran the country from behind their inkpots. You imagine one muttering to himself as he jots. Horemheb claims 3 goats, but I only see 2 legs and a stubborn expression. And of course, there were taxes. Yes, even 4,000 years ago. The joy of working hard just to give a slice to someone in a fancier hat. The harvest tax was paid in grain, livestock, or whatever goods you grew. Scribes and taxmen arrived with guards, ledgers, and a surprising lack of humor. Refuse to pay, and you might be fined or worse, forced into corvée labor. helping dig canals or build storage granaries under the hot sun. But the Nile gave generously, most years, and festivals followed the harvest. You picture music, dancing, feasting, bread baked in clay ovens, beer bubbling in tall jars, and children wearing lotus crowns while chasing one another with palm fronds. Evenings softened by the breeze off the river, priests lighting torches, as thanks to Hapi, god of the inundation. With arms flowing like the Nile itself. Hapi was neither male nor female, but both, a deity of abundance, with pendulous belly and fluid limbs, sometimes painted blue or green, always smiling faintly. Egyptians didn't fear their water god, they honored them, because when Hapi flowed, Egypt thrived. But the river had its dangers too. Crocodiles, flooding, disease, and ghosts. Yes, the Nile had ghosts. Some myths spoke of spirits lost to the river, dragging the unwary into the depths. Swimmers took charms into the water. Parents warned children to stay close to the bank. Even in paradise there were shadows. You now board a ghostly boat wide low, with papyrus sails rustling in a wind that never stirs your hair. Riverboats were the highways of Egypt. Grain, cattle, soldiers, letters all traveled by water. Pharaohs had pleasure barges. Merchants floated. Marketplaces. The dead even had boats drawn on their tombs to ferry them to the field of reeds. One funerary hymn speaks of sailing west, where the sun dies and the spirits begin their journey. You let your fingers drag through the imaginary current. It's warm, almost glowing. But this river didn't just connect Upper and Lower Egypt. It bound together the seen and the unseen, the living and the dead, the political and the personal. It was the spine of the world, and every grain of sand in Egypt owed its shape to the slow, rhythmic exhale of the Nile. You look out across it now. Distant reeds whisper. A fisherman's silhouette fades into mist. Somewhere, a priest sings, morning offerings into the sunrise. And just like that, you're drifting again. By now, the Nile feels like your oldest friend, a gentle pulse beneath your thoughts, steady and certain. But tonight, we're stepping away from its banks and into something far more ambitious. The pharaoh's greatest obsession. No, not gold. Not eternal fame. Not even cats. It's something heavier, more symbolic, and so massive it still boggles the mind. We're talking pyramids. Specifically, that moment you find yourself standing at the foot of unimagined, yes, but so solid. In your mind's eye, it might as well be real. The limestone blocks stretch skyward, each one taller than your shoulders, stacked with impossible precision. You crane your neck until your eyes water. And still, it rises. Welcome to the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It's not just a triangle in the sand, it's a machine for eternity. For centuries, people have debated how it was built. Ramps, levers, alien contractors with a flair for geometry. Historians still argue whether the massive blocks were dragged on wet sand, hauled up spiral causeways, or manipulated using lost technology. One fringe theory even suggests sound vibrations were involved. Yes, pyramid building by singing at rocks. Honestly, we kind of hope that one's true. But let's back up. The step pyramid came first, an evolutionary experiment by the architect Imhotep under Pharaoh Djoser. Before that, burials were humble affairs, simple pits or rectangular structures called mas. But once Imhotep decided to stack mastabas like a cosmic layer cake, everything changed. You imagine the royal workshop now. Scrolls, geometry tools, carved models. Architects in linen robes drawing angles by oil lamp light. Someone looks up and says, "What if we go taller?" A hush falls. Everyone knows that once something gets taller in Egypt, it also becomes sacred. The Great Pyramid was constructed during Egypt's Old Kingdom, around 2560 BCE. More than 2 million blocks, some weighing over 70 tons, fit so tightly together that even modern tools struggle to replicate the precision. No gluen, no mortar. Just mind-numbing manpower, clever engineering, and a divine sense of purpose. And no, it wasn't built by slaves. That's Hollywood nonsense. Archaeological evidence shows that the workers lived in nearby villages, ate meat regularly, and were likely skilled laborers working in rotation, well-fed, well organized, and probably very sore by the end of each day. You enter noun, literally, but mentally through the narrow, sloping passage. It's dark, humid, and the air smells like a mix of dust and antique breath. This tunnel leads upward, into the pyramid's core. Your shoulders brush the walls. Your steps echo oddly. It's claustrophobic, and yet somehow sacred. The so-called Grand Gallery rises ahead of you, its ceiling like a stone cathedral stretched to an angular point. Light glints off, invisible surfaces. Somewhere above lies the king's chamber, a room so stark and silent it hums in your imagination. It's empty now. No treasure, no golden sarcophagus. Just a single stone box, the red granite sarcophagus of Khufu, stripped by time or looters, or maybe never filled at all. That's one of the pyramid's mysteries. No body has ever been conclusively found inside the Great Pyramid. Some think the burial chamber was always symbolic. Others believe the remains were removed centuries ago. Still others suggest Khufu was never buried there at all, and that the pyramid is a spiritual engine rather than a tomb. The ancient Egyptians didn't just build for burial, they built for transformation. Inside, the soul would ascend and Ka joining to become an Aha, a blessed spirit. The pyramid's internal shafts even align with certain stars, including Orion's belt and Sirius, both associated with resurrection and divine kingship. You sit on an invisible ledge now, deep inside this stone puzzle. The silence presses against your eardrums. You can almost hear the echo of thousands of workers, the creak of sledges, the barked orders of overseers, and maybe, just maybe, the low chant of priests consecrating each stone as it's laid. Every block placed, not just by hands, but by intention, and outside. The pyramid glowed. Originally, it was clad in polished Torah limestone, so smooth and bright it reflected the sun like a beacon. Imagine it gleaming white under the Egyptian sun, a literal stairway to the heavens. The capstone, possibly gold, or electrum, would have flashed like a miniature sun at the peak. It's hard to overstate the awe this structure inspired. Even in the ancient world, visitors came to gawk. Later, Greeks and Romans were so stunned, they listed it as one of the 7 wonders. It remains the only one still standing. Because of course it does. The pyramid doesn't just resist time, it laughs at it. But there's a human side too. You imagine a young boy sitting beside the base, watching his father haul stones. The father doesn't speak much, too tired, but he points to the peak and says, "That's for the king, but also for us." Because building for the king meant securing your place in the cosmic order. When the king ascended, his people did too. In theory, not everyone believed it, of course. Graffiti found in workers' quarters pokes fun at their tasks. One group called themselves the Drunkards of Menkaure. Another, the Friends of Khufu. It wasn't all reverence. Some of it was just really hard work. With jokes. You step out now, back into the desert dusk. The wind has softened. The horizon glows orange and purple, silhouetting the pyramids against the dying light. Nearby, smaller pyramids cluster, those of queens and high officials. In the distance, the Sphinx stares into forever, its face weathered, its questions unanswered. You turn once more to the Great Pyramid. It doesn't move, doesn't speak, doesn't need to. It just exists. Monumental, mysterious, patient, like it's waiting for something, or someone. Maybe just asleep. You leave the pyramids behind, their silhouettes etched in your imagination like eternal shadows. The air cools as you wander farther from the royal stones and into the world of the ordinary, though. In Egypt, even the ordinary was anything but. You find yourself in a bustling village, not the noisy chaos of a modern city, but the hushed, rhythmic life of Deir el-Medina. It's a workers' town, tucked between desert cliffs, filled with the echoes of daily life and the secrets of the dead. Not exactly your average suburb. This was no random cluster of huts. Deir el-Medina was a planned settlement, home to the artisans who carved and painted the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These weren't just laborers, they were highly skilled painters, sculptors, and stonemasons. The kind of people who could paint an ibis so delicately that you'd expect it to fly off the wall. You stroll its narrow lanes. past mud-brick homes with whitewashed walls. The doorways are low, the ceilings lower, but every inch is functional. In one courtyard, you imagine a woman pounding grain with a stone mortar. In another, children chase a chicken, yelling in a dialect long since silenced. You pass a well, a shrine, a house with a half-finished poem scrawled onto the wall in faded hieratic script. And that's what makes this place so special. It talks back, you see. Deir el-Medina left behind one of the richest archives of personal writing from the ancient world, estrica, limestone shards, and papyri filled with shopping lists, arguments, love letters, dreams, and even ancient versions of You Up. The people here weren't scribes by profession, but they were literate. More so than most Egyptians, they had access to training, to writing tools, and to each other. You imagine one man sitting at his table, brush in hand, venting his rage at a coworker who stole his chisel. He writes it out, dramatically then, tosses the shard into the bin. Instant relief, and the drama. Oh, there was drama. Love triangles, affairs, accusations of witchcraft. One text describes a fight between neighbors over the unjust borrowing of a cooking pot. Another speaks of a man who claimed divine dreams, but was accused of just being nosy. If ancient Egyptians had had social media, this village would have been the gossip capital of the Nile. Historians still argue whether Deir el-Medina was a utopia of labor rights or a tightly controlled bubble. Workers were paid in rations: bread, beer, fish, vegetables, and they even staged one of the earliest recorded labor strikes when those rations didn't arrive on time. Picture it. Dozens of artisans sitting with arms crossed outside a tomb, refusing to chisel until someone coughs up the onions. You sit now in a modest home, imaginary, yes, but vividly lived in. A small altar glows with offerings to household gods. A carved wooden cat stares from the corner. On the wall, a painted scene of the goddess Hathor, arms open in welcome. The family sleeps, curled up under woven blankets, safe and still. Even the ghosts here are polite. But these workers didn't just build tombs. They built legacies. The Valley of the Kings, the very heart of Egyptian afterlife beliefs, was shaped by their hands. They knew the names of gods, the paths of stars, the rituals of resurrection, and they wrote about it. Some estraka show practice drawings of gods, or scenes from the Book of the Dead. Others offer instructions. Use red ochre here. Make Razai larger. You imagine the quiet intensity of their work, deep inside tombs, painting under flickering torchlight. Not just artistry, devotion. Still, life wasn't all paintbrushes and poetry. Illness, injury, and punishment were very real. One record describes a man with a back so damaged he couldn't stand. Another shows a foreman being fined for skipping work repeatedly, citing wife was ill and had to brew beer as excuses. Valid honestly. You hear laughter now from a nearby courtyard. A late meal, a shared joke, a flute playing somewhere. Children practicing their letters by tracing birds and waves onto broken pots. It's all so normal, so human. So now, you wander past the village's edge and into the cliffs beyond. The silence returns quickly. The Valley of the Kings isn't far. And the tombs these villagers built still whisper their stories through gold leaf and stone ink. You think of Sennajem, one of the craftsmen buried here with his family. His tomb is vibrant, cozy, and painted with scenes of paradise. Endless fields, calm water, God smiling. A wishful future, imagined in detail. He worked for the dead, and he died hoping to join them in comfort. You glance back at the village, just shapes now in the fading light. Deir el-Medina didn't build pyramids, but it built the dreams inside them. And maybe that's even more impressive. Because anyone can build a tomb, but to carve someone else's eternity and believe in it so fully you decorate it like home, that takes something deeper, something eternal. Your steps lead you down from the cliffs of Deir el-Medina, away from the colorful chatter of artisans, and into a place less lively, yet no less sacred. The hush here is thicker, heavier. This is where Egypt hid its greatest secrets, often in plain sight. A silent land of stone guardians and shifting shadows. The temples. You arrive, in your mind's sleepy wanderings, at Luxor, as the ancients called it, I put Rezit, the southern sanctuary, not just a temple, but a statement. A massive one. Its columns stretch toward the sky, thick as tree trunks, carved with glyphs that loop and twist like ancient poetry. The sun here slants between them just so, as if the architecture was built, not to frame the heavens, but to guide them. Temples weren't churches, exactly. You didn't sit through a sermon or line up for confessions. These were cosmic engines, constructed to nourish the gods through offerings, rituals, and carefully timed ceremonies. The gods didn't just live in these temples, they were the temples. Every hall, every statue, every threshold had meaning. You walk slowly through the hypostyle hall at Karnak. It's imaginary, but it feels real enough. A forest of 134 towering columns surrounds you, each one etched with hieroglyphs, names, prayers, praise. Some still bear traces of original paint. Faint blues and reds clinging to stone like the last blush of evening. Imagine painting all of that by hand, while standing on scaffolding, with a brush made from reeds, in 100-degree heat. Ancient Egypt, come for the mysticism, stay for the shoulder cramps. The air inside is still, but never empty. You hear sandals scuffing, low chants in a dead language, the clang of a ritual sistrum, shaking off evil. Candles flicker on stone altars. Statues of gods loom from the shadows. Vom with his tall crown, Sekhmet with her lioness glare, Thoth with his ibis head, forever mid-thought. Some temples had godly roommates. Take Calm Umbu, shared by Sobek, the crocodile god, and Horus, the falcon-headed skylord. Historians still debate how the priests avoided awkward encounters. I thought it was your turn to light the incense, but somehow it worked. You. Imagine the temple calendar now, bursting with feasts and festivals. Opet, the great celebration at Luxor, involves statues of the gods being carried in golden boats along the Nile. Huge crowds lined the riverbanks, singing, clapping, maybe waving palm fronds, like fans at a rock concert. For once, the gods left the sanctuary and joined the people, briefly like divine celebrities on a PR tour. But behind the scenes, utter secrecy. Only the high priests and pharaoh entered the inner sanctum, the Naos, the hidden chamber where the god's statue slept, cloaked in golden mystery. They'd awaken it each morning with chanting, washing, and fresh clothes. Yes, the gods had. Wardrobe changes. Looking radiant was part of the job. You creep now, slowly, towards such a sanctuary. Not really allowed, but let's pretend you're invisible. The room is dim, silent, impossibly still. In its center, a pedestal where the divine image once stood, now gone, or never there in the first place. But the power lingers, like perfume in an empty room. Ancient Egyptians didn't visit temples the way we might today. No selfies, no guidebooks. Their access was limited. Most people worshipped from afar, leaving offerings, carving prayers into walls, hoping a priest would carry their wishes inside. And maybe, just maybe, the god would hear. Some scratched their names and prayers onto statue bases, early graffiti, but polite. Duo Mentotep was here. May the god grant him bread, beer, and a nice breeze. Others prayed to lesser-known deities, like Bas, the squat, wide-eyed protector of households, or Torit, who guarded childbirth with the grumpy face of a pregnant hippo. Egypt didn't just have gods, it had specialists. Over 2,000 deities, each with a domain, doors, perfumes, shadows, even the color green. You might laugh, but in a world of unpredictable floods, deadly heat, and political assassinations, having a god just for toenails probably felt comforting. And the priests, oh, they had it rough. Forget casual weekends. Temple service was intense. Daily purification rituals, strict diets, even hair removal. Many shaved their entire bodies to maintain ritual cleanliness. You imagine one now mid-shave, muttering prayers and cursing sand fleas. But priests weren't just spiritual guides. They were political powerhouses, especially in Thebes. By the later periods, the high priests of Ammon wielded so much influence they rivaled the pharaoh himself. That's when things got messy. Temples could become fortresses of rival power, their wealth outpacing royal treasuries. Historians still argue whether these tensions led to periods of collapse, or if they merely reflected a cosmic shift in public priorities. When temples rule more than thrones, something's off-kilter. Still, the architecture endured. Long after the gods were forgotten, long after the priests were dust, the columns stood. You run a fingertip over one, no tracing an ink. Carved into stone so many centuries ago, it's just a symbol. But also, everything the temple breathes around you slowly, patiently. These spaces were built not for noise, but for presence. They quiet you without asking. And suddenly, the word eternal doesn't seem so You step out of the temple's hush and into the golden heat of mid-morning imaginary. Of course, but it still wraps around you, like linen, warmed by sun. Your path veers away from sacred columns and toward something a little more personal. Less about gods, more about gossip. Because for all its pharaohs and pyramids, ancient Egypt was also a land of stories. Real ones, juicy ones. The kind whispered behind baskets in marketplaces, passed from servant to servant in the palace halls, or scrawled in loopy handwriting on the back of a clay pot. You find yourself now in a courtyard, shaded by a fig tree, that may or may not have witnessed a royal scandal. The leaves rustle, though there's no wind. Somewhere in the distance, someone's arguing about grain prices, while a scribe leans casually against a wall, pretending to be uninterested in everything but his ears. Very much open. Let's talk about one of the oldest court dramas ever written. The tale of the adventures of Cinna, part political thriller, part midlife crisis, memoir, and part moral parable. It tells of a palace official who flees Egypt after the pharaoh's mysterious death, only to spend years wandering foreign lands, fighting desert tribes, and eventually begging to come home so he can be buried properly. Historians still argue whether Cinna was based on a real person or just a beautifully crafted piece of state propaganda. Either way, it's oddly modern. The man freaks out, ghosts his homeland, has a weird exile phase, and finally comes crawling back. You imagine him now, practicing his apology speech while trimming his beard in a puddle. And then there's Hatshepsut, pharaoh, ruler, builder of monumental things and a woman. Not just a queen, a pharaoh. She wore the beard, took the throne, and built temples so grand that even her jealous successors couldn't erase her completely, though they tried. You walk through her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari in your mind. It rises in graceful tiers from the cliff face like a staircase to the gods. Inside, walls show her being crowned by Amen himself. In one scene, she's born of a god literally divine, not subtle, but effective. Later pharaohs, particularly Thutmose III, chiseled her name off monuments and tried to erase her reign. But like an ancient Sharpie stain, she lingers in the records, in the architecture, and in the hearts of modern historians who argue about whether she ruled peacefully or slyly, outmaneuvered her enemies. You pass a group of scribes now, sharing figs and debating the royal succession. One mentions Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh, the one who ditched Egypt's entire pantheon to worship a single sun disk, the Aten. Bold move. He closed temples, moved the capital, changed art styles, and rebranded religion with all the flair of a tech startup. The art from his reign is striking pharaohs with elongated skulls, slouched postures, casual family scenes with daughters climbing into their laps. Very un-Egyptian. Some say he suffered from a disorder. Others think it was a symbolic way of portraying divine uniqueness. Either way, the priests were not amused. After his death, everything went back to normal. Well, sort of. His young son his name Tutankhamun, and moved back to Thebes, and thus began one of the most famous funerary comebacks in history. Yes, King Tut, the boy pharaoh with the golden mask. Dead at 19, mostly forgotten for 3,000 years. Until Howard Carter kicked through some debris in 1922 and found the only nearly intact royal tomb ever discovered. You're there now, mentally crouched beside the famous sealed doorway. A flickering torch illuminates the painted guardian figures. You hear Carter whisper those immortal words. Yes, wonderful things. Inside, over 5,000 objects crammed into 4 small chambers. Beds, chariots, perfumes, linen underwear, and of course, the glittering death mask. gold so polished it still shines through eternity. You glance sideways, expecting Tut's ghost to roll his eyes. He ruled for a blink, died young. Probably had a club foothand. Now he's the poster boy for Egyptian opulence. Fringe fact, his tomb was small for a king. Some believe it was never meant for him, hastily repurposed after his sudden death. Others point to signs of fungal growth, ancient mold, that suggests the paint was still wet when the tomb was sealed. In a rush, possibly murdered, maybe cursed. Highly marketable, you strolled past his golden throne, mentally resisting the urge to sit on it. Nearby, a model boat and a game board wait for an afterlife he never really got to enjoy. But the biggest drama of all, Ramses II. Imagine a pharaoh so obsessed with image that he carved his face onto every surface available. Walls, statues, temples, maybe even a few sandwiches. He ruled for 66 years, married over a dozen wives, fathered more than 100 children, and fought the famous Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, which may or may not have been a tie, depending on whose temple you believe. One inscription shows him single-handedly defeating an entire army. Another says his horse gave a speech. Subtle propaganda wasn't really Egypt's thing. You find yourself now before the colossal statues at Abu Simbel, massive versions of Ramses glaring across the Nubian border. Stay out, their expression says. Or at least admire. My cheekbones first. Even in death, the drama didn't stop. His mummy was moved multiple times to protect it from tomb robbers, finally ending up in a cache with dozens of other royals. When it was unwrapped in the 19th century, observers noted his strong jawline and surprisingly good hair. Ramses, even in death, refused to look bad. Egypt, you begin to understand, wasn't just about glory. It was about memory. The fight to be remembered was as fierce as any war. Statues, scrolls, tombs all meant to shout a single message through time: I mattered. And here you are, thousands of years later, still listening, still remembering. The wind shifts, curling around your thoughts like the edge of a linen shroud, and suddenly you're back in the desert, again not the bright, polished Egypt of golden masks and spotless temples, but the dusty, unfiltered one. The one where sand gets in everything, papyrus wilts in the sun. And not every story ends in marble halls or alabaster peace. Tonight, we walk among the forgotten. You're on the outskirts now, where the grand avenues of the pharaohs fade into winding trails, and tombs no one visits anymore. Picture broken stone, half swallowed by dunes, and names on walls so faded even the gods might struggle to read them. You pass a shattered doorway. Inside, silence. And something else, the echo of someone who once hoped they'd be remembered. Forever. NWASN. Single quotes TIT. Ancient Egypt is full of mystery. But it's also full of ... gaps. Not everyone got a pyramid, or even a tomb. Most Egyptians were buried in simple pits in the desert, wrapped in red mats or scraps of linen. No elaborate coffins, no golden charms, just earth and sun and a prayer, if they were lucky. The dry sand preserved some of them, accidentally a strange kind of immortality. Without fanfare or fame. You kneel by one such grave, imagining the person who once slept here, a weaver, a brickmaker, maybe someone who watched the pyramids rise from the edges, selling onions to thirsty workers and wondering if any of it would survive. They certainly didn't imagine a stranger whispering about them thousands of years later. But here you are. And then there are the graves that were marked but robbed. Repeatedly, Egypt had professional tomb robbers. Whole gangs, some with inside connections. Guards were bribed. Coffins smashed. Amulets stolen. Even mummies were unwrapped to search for jewelry hidden in bandages. Some papyri preserve the confessions of these thieves, written during trials. You imagine one defendant shrugging. Your Honor, I was hungry. Also, the tomb was unlocked. Historians still argue whether these robberies were out of desperation, greed, or simply cultural shifts in how the dead were respected. But many royal mummies were moved and hidden by priests, carefully rewrapped, reburied, sometimes labeled like lost luggage. Ramses II, found in a secret cache, Seti. Same. They weren't buried together. But they ended up together. You now drift through one of these hidden tomb caches, imagined, of course, but oddly vivid. Dozens of mummies stacked like sacred logs, each once a king or queen. Silent, shuffled, protected by a handful of priests, who hoped time would forget them just enough to keep them safe. And then there's the Book of the Dead. Not a book, really. More like a custom spell list, a spiritual mixtape tailored to your soul. You weren't buried with just hopes. You were buried with instructions. How to cross rivers of fire. How to greet the gods. Which passwords to whisper to which gatekeepers. One papyrus version stretches over 70 feet long. Imagine your descendants reading that, while trying not to trip on your sandals. You conjure an image now of a scribe, hunched over parchment, carefully copying spells for a middle-class merchant who scrimped and saved for this afterlife guide. He wants to be prepared. He's read the stories. He knows what happens if you take the wrong turn in the underworld. And honestly, you sympathize. That's the kind of place where forgetting the name of a serpent can get you devoured before breakfast. But some didn't believe in all that anymore. During later periods, Egypt saw foreign rulers: Libyans, Nubians, Persians, Greeks, and finally Romans. Each brought their own gods, their own ideas. Temples were renovated or closed. The language evolved. Hieroglyphs gave way to Demotic, and later Coptic. The old spells lost their power as fewer and fewer people could read them. Eventually, even the priests forgot. The temples fell quiet. The gods, silent. The golden names of kings, scrubbed by time or conquest. One final irony: many ancient monuments survived not because they were preserved, but because they were repurposed. Temple walls turned into churches. Stone blocks reused in homes. A divine column now holding up someone's laundry line. And yet Egypt lingers. You're walking now through the ruins of a half-forgotten village. You spot a statue's foot sticking out of a farmer's wall. A pillar now used as a bench. A hieroglyph carved with care, turned upside down. But these aren't insults. They're echoes. Proof that something once mattered here. That it was big, and strange, and sacred. And then curiously Egypt returned. Napoleon's scholars arrived with measuring tapes and sketches. Giovanni Belzoni, a circus strongman turned explorer, squeezed through temple corridors. Howard Carter broke through. Tutankhamun's seal. Western museums scrambled to fill their halls with statues and sarcophagi, sometimes respectfully, often not. Historians still argue over what belongs where. Should treasures stay in Cairo, or return from London, Paris, Berlin? The debate continues, with legal battles, diplomatic feints, and the occasional shady auction. Somewhere, an auctioneer dusts off a scarab and says, "Let's start the bidding at eternal mystery." You sit now in an imagined museum. Maybe it's real, maybe it's mental. The walls are glass, the lights soft. In a case beside you rests an amulet blue faience, shaped like an eye. The Eye of Horus, protector, watcher, a symbol of healing. No one knows who it belonged to, but someone once held it in their hand, slipped it into a tomb, whispered a name, and now, in the dark of night, in the hush of your room, in the space between sleep and story, you're holding it too. The eye glows faintly in your mind, pulsing with all the weight of a civilization that never quite went away. You set it gently back into its imagined glass case. Rise from your imaginary bench, and begin to walk again, this time into the realm where Egypt stopped being just Egypt and became something far stranger. You're crossing borders now, not of land, but of time. Because the last centuries of ancient Egypt weren't a decline, they were a transformation. We begin with the Persians. Around 525 BCE, Cambyses, II of Persia, marched into Egypt and took over with that particular conqueror's flair, brutally efficient, slightly unhinged. He reportedly stabbed the Apis Bula, sacred animal, and insulted Egyptian gods. Not exactly a diplomatic win. Still, Persia held Egypt for over a century, introducing new administrators, customs, and lots of angry priests. Then came the Greeks. Not just visiting Greeks, ruling Greeks. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, he was smart about it. He didn't fight Egyptian religion. He embraced it. Or at least wore it like a perfectly tailored cloak. He was declared a son of Ammon at the Oracle of Siwa, a clever move that made him pharaoh in the eyes of the people and a hero in his own epic. You walk beside his retinue, now golden armor glinting, soldiers whispering that Egypt smells like incense and baked fish. Alexander didn't stay long. He named a city after himself, Alexandria, and headed east to conquer more of the world. Classic overachiever. But his legacy lingered. After his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, grabbed Egypt like a souvenir and declared himself pharaoh. Thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty. Greek rulers dressed as Egyptian gods. The temples stayed open, the rituals continued, but beneath it all, change hummed like a lyre string pulled too tight. Imagine the blend: Egyptian deities with Greek names, hieroglyphs sharing space with Greek inscriptions, priests negotiating donations in drachmas. It was fusion, but not always harmony. And at the tail end of this dynasty, Cleopatra the Seventh. Yes, that Cleopatra. Fluent in multiple languages, shrewd, charismatic, and surprise, almost certainly not the bombshell Hollywood made her out to be. Coins from her time show a sharp nose, intense gaze, and a mind like a blade. She didn't rule with perfume, she ruled with strategy. You're on her barge, now imagination, fully committed, sailing down the Nile, beneath purple sails. Musicians play, servants pour wine, and Cleopatra lounges, not as a seductress, but as a queen born into chaos. Rome looms on the horizon, and she knows it. Her alliance with Julius Caesar, then Mark Antony, was as much about survival as passion. Rome, of course, had no patience for old gods. When Octavian, later Augustus, defeated Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium, it was the end of Egypt's independence. Cleopatra died how is still debated. Snakebite, poison, or political necessity. Egypt became a Roman province in 30 BCE, and that, in a way, was the end. But not the kind you might think. You walk now through Roman Egypt, past temples still functioning, festivals still happening, even as Latin words begin to edge out the older spells. Some traditions remained, others faded. Time doesn't erase Egypt, it just rewrites the margins. By the 3rd century CE, Christianity arrived. At first, underground quiet symbols etched into abandoned temples. Whispered prayers replacing hymns to Ra. Then, it became official. Pagan temples were closed. Many gods were declared demons. Statues were smashed or defaced. Sacred scrolls burned. It wasn't personal. Just a new order taking root. Imagine an old priest, watching his temple sealed for the last time. He presses a hand to the door, not in anger, in farewell. But even this wasn't a full erasure. The last hieroglyph was written in 394 CE at Philae. On the island of Isis, a tiny inscription, like the final word of a sentence, no one could remember how to pronounce. And then, silence. For centuries, no one could read hieroglyphs. The language of the gods vanished. Egypt became a land of relics, ruins, and stories told by outsiders. Misunderstood, exoticized, but never truly forgotten. Historians still argue whether this final silence was a tragedy or a natural transformation. After all, Egypt never died. It simply changed masks. And then, a breakthrough. In 1799, during Napoleon's campaign, French soldiers discovered a black slab near Rosetta. 3 scripts carved into it: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. You're crouched beside it now, brushing sand from its surface. The Rosetta Stone, a codebook, a whisper across 1,400 years. A young French scholar named Jean-Francois Champollion cracked the code in 1822. He spoke Egyptian aloud, again for the first time in over a millennium. The silence cracked open. Suddenly, temples spoke. Tombs told their stories. Names had voices. Kings walked out of anonymity, and Egypt came rushing back into the world's imagination. Tourists followed. So did archaeologists, museums, fortune, hunters, and mystics. Some looted, some preserved. Some merely gawked. But all stood in awe. You watch as boats arrive in Alexandria, cameras clicking, maps unfolding. Somewhere, a scholar mutters, "The afterlife isn't what I expected, it's noisier." And somewhere else, an ancient spirit smiles, faintly amused. You remembered me after all. You pass a souvenir stall, now cheap scarabs, fake papyri plastic, pyramids. A little girl chooses a necklace with an ankh. She doesn't know what it means, not really. But she wears it anyway. And just like that, the symbol lives again. Section 15. And now, after all the deserts crossed and dreams exhumed, after gods and gold and ghosts and gossip, we find ourselves here at the final stretch of the journey. Not with fanfare, but with a whisper. Egypt, after all, doesn't end, it drifts. You're walking along the Nile again. It's quiet tonight. Too quiet, almost as if the river itself is holding its breath. No pharaohs shout, no priests chant, just the steady, hushed rhythm of water meeting sand. Modern Egypt buzzes far in the distance. Sky rose lights like a constellation flipped upside down. But where you are, it's all darkness and starlight, and the soft sound of something ancient. Thinking you pass a half-buried sphinx, forgotten even by the tomb robbers. Its nose is gone, its face worn smooth by sandstorms and centuries, but its presence still solid. Still watching, nearby, a date palm sways. A lizard scrambles across, a carved block, its tail flicking dust off an old cartouche. The name is faded, unrecognizable, but once, someone carved it with great care, with hope that they'd be remembered. It's a funny thing, memory. Egypt tried to conquer time through architecture, writing, and ritual, and it sort of worked. Sure, the names of kings changed, the temples fell, even the gods died. But the stories, the feelings, they survived. You remember the humble family at Deir el-Medina, painting scenes of paradise on their tomb walls. You remember the drunk pyramid crew scrawling graffiti inside royal tomb shafts. You remember Hatshepsut, Cleopatra, Akhenaten, and the little boy Tutso, glittering, so doomed. And you realize, Egypt isn't about what was buried. It's about what refuses to stay buried. Historians still argue whether ancient Egypt was a theocracy, a bureaucracy, or a beautiful chaos of both. But here, in the hush of the final night, it feels like something even simpler. A giant mirror, one that reflects our hopes, our fears, our need to belong to something timeless. You pause near a crumbling pylon wall, where the stars seem to align just right. And for a fleeting second, you feel at that impossible scale of time pressing gently on your shoulders. All those lives, all those prayers, all those flickering lamps carried down stone corridors. You see a priest lighting incense, in the dark, whispering the same words for the 1000th time. A farmer crossing his fingers that the Nile floods high enough this year. A scribe smiling at his cat while copying a love poem. A girl balancing water jugs, pausing to look at a statue and wondering what it all means. Their lives are over, but they are not gone. They're written into the sand, the wind, the hush between waves, and maybe now, in some tiny way, they're written into you. You look back one last time, not at monuments, but at moments. At the laughter in a courtyard, the footprints behind a tomb, the unfinished spell on a piece of papyrus. And then, slowly, gently, you let it go. The sand quiets now, the sky overhead softening from inky black to the faintest pre-dawn blue. The Nile's current slows in your imagination, growing still and wide as a sleeping breath. Your steps slow too. The journey's weight has melted into your limbs, heavy but warm, like a thick blanket after a long day. Your thoughts no longer marched, they drift, like boats no longer bound by shorelines, just gently bobbing, light and loose. And though so much of what we've explored is ancient, crumbling, or lost beneath dunes, a strange sense of comfort lingers. The kind of peace that comes from knowing that even the forgotten had stories. That even dust remembers. So if your eyelids are heavy now, I hope they are, let them close. Let the golden masks fade. Let the pyramids blur at the edges. And let the stars of Nut, goddess of the sky, draw a soft curtain over your mind. The ghosts are quiet now. The river, still that pharaohs no longer need to be heard. They've told their stories, and you, dear listener, have been their final priest, so rest now. Float in your own sacred bark through this gentle night. You are safe, you are held, you are remembered.